Now, this is just after 0800 hours GMT, 0802 hours GMT in the morning of Friday, the 14th of May 2021. This is KhoodeelaarTV television channel, part A of this day, today, Friday, the 14th of May 2021. And we are just pointing out that due to technical issues, strictly to do with technical issues, we may be broadcasting less editions, fewer editions than we would do otherwise. And the other thing is that the length of the broadcast might be shorter than we would like. Like those to be, the length of the broadcast would be shorter, but may not be. We'll try to keep to the average length. So this is Friday, 14th of May 2021. This is still the period of the Eid al-Fitr throughout the world, and we can wish everyone a happy, pleasant, and fulfilling Eid, and adding that the people who have, the Muslims fasting, who have, that is to say, who are well off and can afford to buy stuff, buy foods, and have feasts for their family and themselves. Individuals who are wealthy can buy anything they like. In contrast to the majority of the Muslims who are in poverty and hunger, for whom is not just during the month of Ramadan, but hunger for Muslims is Muslims who are in poverty. Hunger is a day-to-day reality throughout the whole year. And although the Muslim countries and Muslim states and Muslim organizations, many Muslim organizations have got more than enough money to feed the rest of the Muslim community, but we don't. So the fact that they're Muslims, these wealthy people, does not mean that they are behaving as Muslims in relation to their neighbors and in relation to the other Muslims in the community. Many of the Muslims in the world, all of the Muslim kind of quote leaders and Muslim scholars and Muslim ulama and alims, many of them, well, the majority of them actually use the word ummah. Ummah is a reference to, in Arabic, community. But there is hardly any consistent evidence, reliable evidence of well-off Muslims behaving as generous people, giving to the have-nots, the poorer Muslims. And if they don't give to poorer Muslims, in the main, then it is impossible to see how they would be giving to other poor people in their neighborhoods, in their physical kind of neighborhoods and estates and areas and countries and lands and zones and so on. This is the Muslim calendar is 1440s now. So it is 1440 plus years since the Muslim calendar began, and this is long enough time for the Muslim community, the Muslim Ummah, to have worked out how the Muslim Ummah behaves within itself, within members of the Ummah, and within the whole world, across the world. The Muslims, as I said, who are well off and can afford to buy things for themselves, individually, collectively, whatever, do not behave anywhere near as generously as they should be and they could be and they are able to be. So what highlights and what actually illustrates the failure and the negligence of the Muslims, the well-off Muslims, and Muslims in quote power, to affect the policies and behavior of communities they have got power over, either formally or in effect, informally. The Muslims are not behaving to end poverty, to end hunger, and to end destitution and deprivation of Muslims. And they are not doing this to end, doing the necessary to end hunger in the world, affecting other people who are not Muslims and who are of no faith at all, who are of other faiths but not of any faith at all. So this is a serious failing, central failing by the Muslims who can afford but who don't share. Everything in the Islamic kind of injunction, the Sharia, the directive and the directions, no matter which part of the so-called Muslim divide the Muslims are members of or belong to. Well, there is a majority, probably the majority is the Sunni, and there is the Shia, and there are other smaller sectors. So that means that the Muslim culture across the world throughout the 12 months is a culture of continuing, persistent violation of the duties of the Muslims, individually and societally. And that is something that most of the Muslims in control of powerful positions vis-a-vis the Muslim community in their areas, this is something they should be addressing, they should be actually talking about, but they don't. And the other thing is what I call the Muhammad al-Fayed factor. Why do I call it Muhammad al-Fayed factor? Because al-Fayed tried to revive the British satirical magazine called The Punch. It's a weekly magazine called Punch. And al-Fayed was viciously attacked by Ian Pissoff, who edits the fortnightly, quote, satirical magazine Private Eye. And the sole purpose behind Ian Pissoff's vicious attacks on al-Fayed was to protect the business monopoly of the Private Eye. So therefore, what Ian Pissoff did was to abandon the moral, the ethical kind of duties to society. That is to say, if the Punch magazine, as was being revived by Muhammad al-Fayed did its duties and it could help society learn about some of the corruption and criminality that goes on in society in big ways, keeping Britain divided between poor and rich, and the many and the few. And the criminals benefited from the vicious campaign by Ian Pissoff, which campaign forced al-Fayed to shut down the Punch magazine. So what the Muslims in the world, the ones who fund the likes of the British big business and American big business, Western European big business, and war traders and weapons traders, these people, these so-called Muslims, between them, among them, own resources equivalent to trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. But they don't interfere in the racist, anti-Muslim, and unjust roles played by the status quo of the media, Fleet Street, and its equivalents in Paris, equivalent in the rest of Western Europe, and in North America, in Canada. But they could. These Muslims who own trillions and trillions, not billions, trillions of dollars equivalent, they could own all the newspapers combined in the whole world, all the broadcasting outfits combined in the world, the mainstream broadcasting, all the main controlling news agencies, that is like the Reuters, Associated Press of America, and their equivalents, but the AFP, Reuters, and the Associated Press. These are three of the biggest, most dominant agencies, and their agenda has been always anti-Muslim, and their agenda has been corrupt and corrupting. Now, any genuine adherent of the Islamic culture and Islamic duties must see that that is the case. And the fact that none of the big Muslim trillionaires has, as far as I can determine on the objectively, independently open, accessible sources of information, none of these trillionaires has ever even talked about countering these corrupt, anti-Muslim, and anti the poor people in other religions and other faiths and people with no faiths at all. None of these trillionaires has ever talked about stopping the rot and making the world a fair place by countering, exposing, and stopping the criminal lies and perpetuation of the lies by the existing status quo media. Now, that is one of the reasons why we publish this one, world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. Now, Fleet Street stands in this context for all these media liars. Fleet Street, its counterparts in France, counterparts in Washington, New York, and in the USA and the rest of the Western world. Nobody is going to, none of those is going to offer what we offer to the viewer. Because they would be committing self-destructive acts if they told the truth about their roles. Quite apart from that, they haven't got the morality and the ethics that we actually apply daily to the highest standards. So, what is happening here in the Daily Mail, for example, today, on pages 8 and 9, the Daily Mail is contradicting itself in the context of the propaganda for Boris Johnson about the virus and the vaccine. Because the Daily Mail has been the main Fleet Street title that has been condemning the continuation of the lockdown and the continuation of the restrictions, because the Daily Mail has been dishonestly and dangerously, irresponsibly, and criminally responsibly claiming that the virus has gone. Okay, that is on the records, the Daily Mail's records. Yet it is confessing. Look at the last banner, last line there. It says new Indian variant fears, and it's about COVID. New Indian variant fears. Now, this criminally edited, lying Daily Mail has been leading the pack, if you like, irresponsibly claiming that the virus is gone, and it is now admitting now. Why? Because the Indian virus, or the Indian variant of the virus, is very, very, very dangerous and lethal, to the point that hundreds of thousands of Indians are succumbing to this virus as we speak. Now, this is the one that is double-edged lie. It is admitting that the Indian variant is there. I mean, is threatening the safety of the United Kingdom in terms of the control of the virus. But it is giving the reassuring fast side of the two-page spread. And it is saying fast track. So it's emphasizing fast track jabs. It is still lying, and then it's saying that fast track jobs program is to fight the strain, the Indian strain. That is the Daily Mail, and this is the Times, which too has been following the same agenda, asking Johnson to ease the lockdown, and this is confessing. This lying Times, owned by the liar Rupert Murdoch, is saying race to stop Indian strain. Now, anyone watching this over the last few weeks would know that we have denounced, without exception, we have denounced this promotion by the Times and the Telegraph, Boris Graf, the Daily Mail, this scum, and Beaver Brooks, Daily Express. We have said that they were lying. Now, anyone watching this might think, well, why is he saying they're lying? Surely they're not lying. They're only being optimistic and kind of reassuring. Not true. Newspapers are liars, and they don't tell the truth. That is their main role. So they're lying propaganda organs and outlets. And they're doing that for the political kind of safety and protection and promotion of the image of Boris the Liar Johnson. And that is the Times. And the newspaper too, which has been promoting the lies of Boris Johnson about easing the lockdown, is admitting now again. Look at the vaccine surge. One day they said that it's gone. There is no problem with the virus. The next day, they said that this Indian strain is a threat. And what is the Financial Times saying, confessing? The Financial Times is confessing, and it's doing a take on the Latin phrase modus operandi, and it is replacing the modus with the Modi, Narendra Modi, and publishing this banner on the front page of the Financial Times today, which we call Financial Crimes, Modi operandi, India's outrage at bungled response to deadly pandemic. Now, bungled response is a severely stupid understatement. Modi didn't do the bungle. Modi did the intentional unleashing of the virus by removing the lockdown for political purposes, because Modi was engaged in a criminally responsible Hindutva fascistic bid to take over political control of various states in India that had the election, including Calcutta, West Bengal, in the last fortnight. But he had been waging war against the opponents of Modi's BJP regime, personified by West Bengal Chief Minister and grassroots Congress Party, not the Indian National Congress Party, but grassroots. That is Trinamool. That is the meaning of Trinamool Congress. So TNC leader and Chief Minister of West Bengal for the last 2 terms, Mamata Banerjee, a Brahmin woman who is an exception for a politician in India, because not only is she a woman, she's a Brahmin woman, that is not an exception, but she is a woman who has been leading the state next door to Bangladesh, on the west of Bangladesh. And she has studied Islam. And so in the latest series of speeches she has been making, she's the only, quote, mainstream politician or Hindu politicians in India who has referred to Muslims as ordinary Indians. That is very significant. She has treated Muslims as normal. That is partly because of our political strategy to get the support of the Muslim voters, but also her sense of responsibility about saving India from disintegration. Now, in the subcontinent, in the 70 plus years since August 1947, when the British left the subcontinent and ceased to be the imperialist, quote, power, disintegration has taken place. Remember 1971 and the disintegration of Pakistan. So it's not a concept that is unheard of. And disintegration is kind of brewing right across India. And we shall be talking more about that in due course, not in this particular edition necessarily. We are going to take a look at the Financial Times on page 21, which calls the big read, and it is about India. And this is the big read, which is the whole page. The whole Financial Times page is a broadsheet. Now that's a picture of Narendra Modi. And that's the heading. So we shall read the heading. Because of the light, it is too much light there. COVID crisis diminishes Modi's stature. Well, that is an understatement. Modi is done for. Modi has done political suicide. This time he has done political kind of harakiri many times, but this one is definitive because, as the Financial Crimes admits, many Indians feel abandoned by their leader. who ignore signs of a second wave and has appeared at times indifferent to their plight. If the disillusionment continues, it could sap his political authority. By Amy Kasmin, Benjamin Parkinen, Josna Singh. It's a whole page of the big read. And there are highlights in the following figures. 261,000 deaths caused by COVID-19 in India, according to official figures. There have been more than 23.7 million cases in the country. So that 261,000 is a lie. Modi's lie. There are 30 million plus people that have been infected. And 1.5 million to 2 million is the number estimated by some independent experts of the number of new daily infections in India. This contrasts with the official estimates of the 7-day rolling average of new cases, 375,000. So it's a gross underestimate by the lying criminal Modi regime. And 50,000 is the upper estimate by independent experts of the true tally of daily COVID deaths. 50,000 people are dying every day of COVID virus in India. 50,000 people. Think about that. So, and it says, let's read the first couple of paragraphs. Anaria is haunted by her father's last request as he lay dying in an Indian government COVID hospital where doctors struggle with a deluge of critical patients. The last clear words I heard from him were, "Get me some help, get someone to attend to me." The 30-year-old arts educator, who uses only one name, recalls she and her brother had hunted desperately for a hospital for their 67-year-old father, who was struggling to breathe at home despite having an oxygen cylinder. Delhi's private hospitals were full, so they rushed by ambulance to a public hospital only to find it barricaded shut. The hospital staff told us to leave because there was no bed available. Anaria says they wound up at a makeshift government COVID isolation facility with 4 junior doctors monitoring more than 100 patients. Her father got oxygen but no medication. Admitted to hospital 2 days later, he was left without oxygen or care for the night. When he finally got an oxygen bed, it was too late. The harm was already done, Anaria says. Today, the young woman is overwhelmed with grief as well as rage at her family's ordeal. It is a fury pervasive in urban India as citizens struggle to obtain medical care for ailing loved ones and scarce vaccinations amid an enormous wave of COVID-19 infections. And it goes on. So the Financial Crimes is eventually publishing something that it should have published months ago. And the essential truth is that it is admitting that India is deluged and Indians are dying in the thousands every day, 50,000 people dying. And the Times one is also including in the piece, Race to Stop the Variant Indian Strain, has got a side story about doubt over Portugal holidays. Remember, they were celebrating the whole week. The whole week. I mean, the scum, Murdoch scum yesterday overdid the hype. The great British Musk-off. And we said that was a lying, irresponsible, lying boast for the gullibles, unquestioning gullibles, the brainwashed and the brainwashables, and the vulnerables. Vulnerables to both propaganda and lies, and vulnerable to the consequences of irresponsible behavior by the government, fronted by the congenital liar Boris Johnson. He has been the one that has been the source of the kind of propaganda. And he has been given the impunity, as we have been saying, from accountability by the entirety of the corrupt Fleet Street and the media. And they're talking about Portugal in these subdued terms, subdued only as compared to yesterday's boast. Britons, hoping for a holiday in Portugal this month, have had their plans plunged into chaos, as it looked likely that tourists will be banned until at least May 30th. Now, these criminals cannot resist putting a reassuring kind of line in a statement that should be telling the truth about the really gloomy, grim prospect. Now, they keep hyping up, and that is the reason why they put until 30th of month, 30th of the month, that is the May. Back to the cases more than double inside a week. 10 million could have second jobs brought forward, and calls for delay of lockdown easing. Now that is the last part of the subheading, but that should be the first one, that calls for delay of lockdown easing. That should have been the first. But like the piece about Portugal, the lying Times puts the reassurances in. I mean, when it is having to actually tell the grim truth about the impact and effect of the responsible Boris Johnson and Narendra Modi removal and easing of the lockdown and the restrictions. Now, here is the start of that paragraph about the Indian race to stop Indian strain. 10 million people could have their second dose of vaccine brought forward as the government tries to stop a faster spreading Indian coronavirus variant from delaying the end of restrictions. Cases of this strain have more than doubled in a week, and Boris Johnson said that he was anxious about the threat it posed to the lifting of the lockdown. The criminals are in concert in promoting the idea to lift the lockdown, as opposed to solely emphasizing safety of the people. Safety is the opposite of lifting the restrictions and lifting the lockdown. And it is the same narrative, the same agenda that Dominic Cummings has confessed was underlying Boris Johnson bragging, contemptuous, irresponsible boast that let thousands of bodies pile high last year, before he imposed any restrictions at all. And here is a promotion piece for the crook, David Cameron. But even more kind of significant than Cameron's promotion of Cameron by the Times is the confession by David Miliband. Remember what we have been saying? We say that we are this program, this broadcast, this program of broadcasts, let's say, is world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. And I mean that because we have been saying for significantly long time in the context of the events, the Keir Starmer had politically murdered the Labour Party. Remember? And we have put different kind of formats and formulations. We said Keir Starmer had been politically murdering the Labour Party. And we said that he politically murdered the Labour Party and that he had politically murdered the Labour Party. Okay, so all of these reflect and represent the same state, that the Labour Party is dead politically. And what is David Miliband saying in the Times? He's saying that the Labour Party has no right to exist. Well, he's qualifying by saying that the Labour Party has no divine right to exist. So it's dead. Although his wording is different from ours, but he's admitting the same fact, the truth, that the Labour Party is no longer. And the fact that the Labour Party is no longer is not an opinion, it's a fact. None of the Fleet Street items or the news headings and news content, okay, the news is false and lies and whatever, but even so, they have got references to Cameron, to India, to Johnson, and the rest, but they don't refer to the Labour Party. The only significant reference to the Labour Party in the Times today is that it doesn't exist. Well, this is our paraphrase based on our analysis, diagnosis for the last few weeks. During which we have actually used the phrase politically murdered, but we have effectively meant that the Labour Party was comatose. And we have said that during the 5 calendar years of Corbyn in that post as so-called leader, Corbyn destroyed the Labour Party. Now that is the opposite of what his kind of artificially created fans think or say. Now we are not bothered about his fans. We are bothered about the fact and the truth, and most importantly, the implication and the impact on the society of Corbyn's failure and destruction. No amount of plaudits and praise for Corbyn would alter the facts. And the facts are that Corbyn, who lacked the intellect, also was ill-served by his advisors, who persistently failed to tell him that instead of running away from the gathering of reporters, holding forth their microphones at him and towards him as he emerged from his house in Islington in North London, Corbyn should have always, every time, stopped and spoken. He should have spoken to the, quote, reporters holding the microphones at him. Why? We have said that that would have been the absolute emphatic daily political broadcast by the leader of the Labour Party, leader of the opposition. Now, if he had the intellect and if he had been advised by intelligent people who had the interest of the country at heart, Corbyn would have set out the previous 24 hours failures of the Conservatives in government. And so Corbyn would have been on the record as having set out on a daily basis the alternative that the country needed, the better alternative, the better prospect that the country needed than the grim depression represented by the Conservatives. But Corbyn didn't do that. Not only didn't do that for 5 calendar years, he also gave the 2019 election. He gave it away to Johnson. Now, legally, as Cameron had created the legislation, there shouldn't have been an election in 2019. And if Boris Johnson failed to have the election, then he would have collapsed by now. And it needed nerves of steel on the part of the opposition, which is fronted by Jeremy Corbyn, to hold forth, hold out. He should have resisted all the overtures by Johnson for a few months, and Johnson would have been forced to resign. That was the amount of tension, that was the level of tension that prevailed for months before the 12th of December 2019 election that Corbyn gave away to Johnson. So Corbyn not only was intellectually deficient and ill-starred by stupid, ignorant, incompetent advisors, Corbyn was transparently stupid. Intellectual deficiency is not necessarily equivalent to stupidity of the scale, that Corbyn displayed, exhibited. So we are saying what we are saying about Keir Starmer. He is behaving as the killer of the Labour Party, political murderer of the Labour Party. We are not calling him intellectually deficient. We are calling him a conservative, and we are saying that he murdered the Labour Party. So therefore today, as every day, the Fleet Street papers don't have anything about Keir Starmer politically. Okay? And that is the truth. So when the Times says that David Cameron's salary was higher, the salary at Greensill was higher than the salary he got as Prime Minister, what it is admitting factually too is that Cameron was corrupt, that Cameron was a crook. But the Labour Party is not saying it. It's the kind of remote kind of hearing that he had before the administration or administrative committee, select committee in the House of Commons. Let's read this paragraph. This is an analysis of the hearing he had. The David Cameron's 4-hour grilling by 2 parliamentary committees was high on political drama, but little to shed light on the murky finances of the company that funded his lifestyle. That is According to Oliver Wright, Cameron insisted that he had done due diligence before becoming an advisor to Greensill. That's a pack of lies. However, despite entertaining potential clients, extensive use of the corporate jet, and his lobbying of ministers, he appears not to have taken much interest in the company's finances. He seemed to have little knowledge of Greensill's reliance on the steel magnate Sanjeev Gupta, the Indian steel magnate who is the second Gupta to feature in widespread corruption news in India and South Africa, in the UK and South Africa. He was equally vague about its complex financial model and seemed to have asked few questions of his losses, of his bosses. The problem is that others are asking those questions. Administrators are unpicking Greensill's finances to establish what, if anything, is left for its creditors. The Financial Conduct Authority confirmed this week that it was looking into potential criminal allegations about the circumstances that led to the company's failure. There are three parliamentary inquiries into various aspects of the scandal, while the National Audit Office is looking into Greensill's involvement with the government. The difficulty for Cameron is that the central plank of his defense is that Greensill was a noble venture and his lobbying was for the wider public good. That may prove to be correct if it is found that Greensill was in financial difficulty while Cameron was lobbying for support. However, he will be in an awkward position. The jeopardy for Cameron is that because he asked so few questions, he probably does not know where the truth lies either. Now, this is supposed to be the analysis by the Times. This is not an analysis. This is complete stupidity. And this is letting off Cameron. And the whole coverage, the whole piece about Cameron's appearance before the committees is completely inadequate and lacks gravitas and lacks traction. Now, there are exceptions. This reference to Angela Eagle, the Labour MP who was one of the questioners or interrogators of Cameron yesterday, that is Thursday. Angela Eagle, the Labour MP, told Cameron that she had read his text messages to ministers and officials, and it came across as more like stalking than lobbying. Are you at least a little bit embarrassed by the way you behaved? She asked. Cameron again insisted that at the time his actions were appropriate. The government was introducing plans to try and help businesses, and we thought we had a good idea. There are lessons to learn and lessons for me to learn. In future, the single formal email or formal letter would be appropriate. Obviously, what's happened is deeply regrettable, and being part of a company that goes into administration is depressing. But never mind me. For the people who lost their jobs, they had whole futures invested in this company, being their future. And it's incredibly depressing to see it go wrong. Now, that is a lie. And there are other pieces in the Times on these two pages, pages 12 and 13, that in effect undermine those who attacked and are trying to ask questions of Cameron. This attack piece by Quentin Letts. Now, Quentin Letts is a long-time Daily Mail sketch writer about the Parliament, political sketch writer. He is a racist He's a reactionary and he's a complete and utter liar. But because he has had the platform at the Daily Mail for as long as he has had, his lying and his dishonesty and his criminal road are all kind of ignored. And now he has been given the platform, similar platform, to tell lies on the Times. And that is what he is doing. And he's attacking the MPs that questioned Cameron yesterday. I'm not going to even quote him. And there is a call by a trade unionist in Glasgow that Priti Patel, the Gujarati origin, Home Interior Minister, should herself be deported because of the attack on the two migrants that were being deported yesterday in an assault by the immigration enforcement, which was completely resisted by the people of Glasgow. And that is something we shall be going on a bit more about later and in later parts. And it says, a leading trade unionist was accused of racism last night after calling for Priti Patel to be deported. Howard Beckett said that the Home Secretary should be removed from the country instead of two asylum seekers whom Border Force officials tried to detain in Glasgow yesterday. Beckett, who is a leading candidate in the race to replace Len McCluskey as General Secretary of the Unite Trade Union, tweeted, Priti Patel should be deported, not refugees. She can go alone with anyone. She can go along with anyone else who supports institutional racism. She is disgusting. The comments led to him being suspended from the Labour Party now. This is ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, immediately, the deadly Starmer suspends a member of the Labour Party for telling the truth. Now, what the Beckett statement or tweet about deporting Priti Patel is about is that she is less entitled to think that the deportation of two asylum seekers is legitimate, lawful, compassionate, and in accordance with the UK's obligations of the various treaties, including the Refugee Convention. Then the hype that she is given by the Fleet Street lying media outlets, propaganda outlets, suggest. And there are two pictures, there are three pictures in the accompanying the story. Hundreds of protesters surrounded a Home Office enforcement van in Glasgow after two asylum seekers were seized yesterday. That is the Times. Okay, and that is something that we shall be talking a great deal more about in due course. And here is an admission of the abolition of crime. This one actually ascribes the collapse of crimes to the victims of the crimes concerned, giving up their pursuit of the criminals. So this is the headline on page 16 of the Times today. More than 1 in 4 criminal cases collapse as victims give up. So I've already summarized the main message there. And we shall take a look and see if there is a cartoon in the Times worth referring to. The only cartoonist in the Times that has got any traction is the cartoonist Peter Brooks. And the Times and the Tories are so backward and stupid. This is Peter Brooks talking about. This is Peter Brooks actually getting the cartoon almost right about David Cameron. Of course, he has put the inquiring members of parliament in one place, not showing them as remotely as they actually did yesterday. But this is the one that says the chair of the committee is shown there in the cartoon. And when did you last see sense? That's the question to Cameron. And Cameron is standing before the chair, before the committee. That's Peter Brooks' cartoon. So, Cameron is being condemned for having been stupid. And the Times has got a latest piece about against climate change opposition. We shall talk about the attacks on the Palestinians later, not in this particular edition, because that would take longer. There is a letter in the Times about a cat traveling up and down the trains, a particular railway line, and being put on the last train home at night and let off at its home station, Chipping Norton. Now, this is a letter from Claire Stanford, London N6, and the whole letter reads, well, the headline is, Cats Stop. Further to the letter, Rail Kindness. May 13, my grandfather worked for the God's Wonderful Railway, GWR, in the early 20th century on the branch line between Banbury and Cheltenham. A job for the guards was to ensure that a peripatetic cat, which travelled up and down the line, was put on the last train home at night and let off at its home station, Chipping Norton. Now, Chipping Norton is in Oxfordshire, not far from David Cameron's home. Now there are four letters in a group. The main group of letters headed Search for Solution to Labor's Identity Crisis. Now that is not identity crisis. It has died. It has died. And the Daily Mail is, of course, continuing the attack on Harry and Meghan. Now, here is a piece that is interesting because yesterday, based on the item in the latest Private Eye that is dated today but was available on Wednesday, the right wing press, like the Daily Mail, the Scum and others, were in denial for Boris Johnson over the County Court judgment issue that Private Eye leads with in its current edition. And they have now found this person who took out the court order against Boris Johnson. This is the COVID conspiracy theorist who secured a £535 court judgment against wrongdoer Boris Johnson. Yvonne Hobbs also launched a blizzard of court claims against Home Secretary Priti Patel for extortion, Health Secretary Matt Hancock for causing harm, and Chancellor Rishi Sunak for fraud. Now, all of these are absolutely valid claims. And the fact that this person, Yvonne Hobbs, had to do all of these shows that the Labour Party died. Because these are the issues that the Labour Party should have highlighted, but it didn't. The death of the Labour Party nationally, in terms of the UK, is evident in the fact that the corrupt post of elected mayor has been retained in Tower Hamlets and in Newham at the 6th of May 2021 so-called referendum on the future of the, as they wrongly say, governance. There is no governance in Tower Hamlets or in Newham. But the fact that the so-called voters voted in Tower Hamlets, more than 80% of the votes approximately went in favor of retaining the corrupt mayor post, and 18% went for scrapping it. Shows that crooks dominate in the organized political grouping that is organized in Tower Hamlets under the misleading but real title of the Labour Party. Because as we have been saying, if the statement published few weeks earlier that all political parties had united on the need to scrap the elected mayor post, then who are the people who voted for keeping the mayor post in such an apparently large number? That shows that the so-called parties were lying because they didn't actually do the campaign that they should have done, and they would have got the following because they are the ones who communicate. They are the ones who communicate most with the people who actually cast the vote. And they are the ones who are known and identified as the politically aware and active parts of the electorate and the community. So how is it that if four of all the parties, it's not just four, there are all the smaller parties as well, if they all agree and if that agreement was confirmed in giving the confirmation to the likes of the Islam idiotizer which published that alleged agreement, then what did they do to communicate that agreement to their supporters? Clearly, they didn't communicate that to their supporters. Or the supporters, or the people who voted for keeping the mayor, corrupt mayor post, are orchestrated and mobilized and led, quote, misled by phantoms. So, whatever the truth, whatever is the actual manipulation and factor that was responsible for the 18% vote for the scrapping of the corrupt elected mayor post, whatever the reason in terms of the factor that influenced the voting, not influenced the arguments, but the voting. Tower Hamlets now needs to be, the community in Tower Hamlets now needs to stop relying on these political parties and get back to what we did and we do: campaign. And campaign regardless of the parties, and campaign regardless of the numerical status of the given party. As I have said before, tell the voters, tell the community the facts about the corrupt mayor post and the corrupt mayor post holder. There can be only one holder at a time. So at any given time, the corrupt mayor post holder was behaving corruptly. So we shall be talking and publishing, talking about the actual incidents of corruption, illegality, abuse, and we shall be elaborating on those, both on this platform, the broadcast, and also in our posts on the social media, including Facebook and on Twitter. Because if this woman, Yvonne Hobbs, has managed to get this court judgment, county court judgment against Boris Johnson, then it shows that it is possible. And it has been possible to have other court judgments against the wrongdoing council in Tower Hamlets, the wrongdoing council in Newark. One of the things that we have said, strictly on the basis of the evidence of its contents, about the private lie and its column, its page called Rotten Boroughs, is that it is itself rotten, in that, first of all, the contents of the Rotten Boroughs are not products or results or functions of the of any investigation by the private lie itself, it actually kind of parasites itself and feeds off the local kind of organs and local kind of outlets. And it picks up stories. But it picks up stories more to fill the spaces than to actually rigorously pursue campaigns against crooks in councils. So although the title is Rotten Boroughs, it is not borne out by most of the contents and most of the coverage. So that makes the Rotten Boroughs column, which is a page as well, a jobbing column. It's not a genuinely investigative column. Sometimes it breaks stories that are almost original, as it did in the case of Tower Hamlets in 2010. Days before the election, Abbas Uddin alias Halal, days before the mayor election, the first mayor election, Abbas Uddin alias Halal, who as a member of the Labour Party had tried and failed to get the nomination by the Labour Party to become the Labour Party's official candidate for the first election for mayor in Tower Hamlets, which took place in October 2010. The Private Lie published a piece literally days before that election, where Lutfur Rahman was the candidate, independent candidate, and the Labour Party had a candidate called John Biggs. And of course, the Labour Party candidate lost, and Lutfur Rahman was allowed to be made the incumbent. And the Private Lie published a piece against Abbas Uddin alias Halal, detailing many of his own errors, misjudgments, wrongdoings, and his corruption. Abbas Uddin alias Halal's corruption was related to his role as a member of the committee of the Spitalfields Housing Co-op, which became Spitalfields Housing Association. And it was alleged that the regulator of the housing co-ops and housing associations, the communities housing and communities organization, a part of the UK Central Government Department for Housing and Communities, had investigated complaints against the abusers of the electoral process in the election concerned of the Spitalfields Housing Association. And in the sourced materials, information that Private Lie obtained about that, the investigation concerned the behavior of candidate A, and the behavior concerned related to the candidate A having used a number of votes for their election, their own election to the management committee of the Spitalfields Housing Association, of a number of dead people. And the Housing Association's regulatory agency about housing co-op or housing associations sent questions to Abbas Uddin Ali Salal and he didn't answer. So all that piece published so soon, well, so shortly before the election held in the last 10 days of the month, October 2010, significantly damaged the case of the Labour Party in Tower Hamlets and unduly, untruthfully, and against the overall interests of democracy and fairness, aided Lutfur Rahman because that publicity was absolutely a last minute kind of gift to Lutfur Rahman. Because the publicity against Abbasuddin's dodgy dossier, which the Private Lie referred to in the piece against Abbasuddin Ali Salal, that dodgy dossier served as a good propaganda and vote gathering and supporter gathering event for Lutfur Rahman. So the criminality and the corruption and the lack of ethics, morality, compliance with the duties required by the various treaties and various rules and laws in force in the UK at the time. All of those are going on, had been going on in the Tower Hamlets Labour Party. And the same can be said of the corrupt narrative, corrupt behavior of the Council of Mosques member bureaucrats. Because the Council of Mosque member bureaucrats in Tower Hamlets were blindly supporting Lutfur Rahman, as became clear during the giving of the evidence before the Election Commissioner Richard Morley during February and March 2015, held in the complex of buildings called the Royal Courts of Justice. That was an election court, but it was held to maximize the exposure of the events taking place. And the exposure that was attained and obtained was aimed at Lutfur Rahman, who was comprehensively denounced by Richard Morley in his 23rd of April 2015 ruling against Lutfur Rahman. That Lutfur Rahman was in post as a result of the 22nd of May 2014 mayor election in Tower Hamlets, but that Lutfur Rahman had behaved either personally and through his agents and through others in corrupt ways, dishonest ways, fraudulent ways. So this is the very short summary of what we shall be expanding on in future editions and other editions about corruption by the incumbent, that is to say post holder in the post of elected mayor in Tower Hamlets. As part of our campaign to stop this post to be allowed to be continued, regardless of the fact that apparently you cannot do any referendum or any claim, any call to scrap it for another 10 years or whatever. That should not be deterring the community from getting rid of this corrupt and corrupting post, which must be got rid of and can be got rid of. And in the back about the topic of new spread of the strain of the virus in this country. And it says that officials increasingly concerned about spread of new strain of the virus in Britain. And there's another one. There's both of these on page 8 of the I newspaper. Extra vaccines sent to areas hit hardest by Indian COVID variant in this country. Now, these criminals of the I newspaper, the morons, we said the morons were lying. When they joined the liars of the Daily Mail and the scum and the Daily Express and the Boris Graf and even the Guardian in unjustifiably and irresponsibly celebrating that the end of the virus is here and all restrictions and lockdown can be lifted. And yet here they're saying extra supplies of vaccines are being sent to areas where the Indian variant is rising. As a scientist warned that it may be too late to stop the strain spreading across the country. Can't be clearer than that. So why has Johnson and his brigade of congenital liars been in the rush that they have been to end the restrictions? Our campaign to hold the government to account goes back decades. And the reason why we have campaigned and we have been campaigning and we are campaigning for accountability by the local government has nothing to do with any party political affiliation by our campaign or our movement. It is, strictly speaking, based on the evidence of the need by the people, of the people, for the support and the service that only an accountable elected post holder can deliver, not an unaccountable post holder. And this is a universal. This is a universal action that we are taking. That is to say, it helps people regardless of their ethnicity, their faith, their gender, nationality, whatever. It is simply as individuals, human beings, in a society, in a social context. So we shall be talking about more of these in the next parts.